Should I do anything
Hey
on my
everyone.
screen?
Oh, it's okay, Don. Hey everyone. My name is Wes. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'm work with the Substance team, and I am very thrilled to have with me Don. And so Don Arceta, he has a long history with Substance, and he was the direct inspiration behind the creation of Materialize, which was a digital material creation contest. So Don recently created a signature collection for us, Oceanic Exploration, and so Don is going to be able to walk through one of the materials he made. So with this signature collection, he has 15 of these new nautical materials, and also, which I'll show you here later in the stream, there's a link as well for the stream. You can find that in the YouTube description, where you can actually download the material that Don is going to show us if you wanted to follow along, or maybe check back later as well. These streams are always recorded, so you can always come back and visit. So again, Don, thank you so much for joining us. I'm honored to be here with you. And so Don, if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe tell us a little bit about your inspiration behind, why you created these nautical materials, just how the process of going into creating a signature collection. So take it away, Don.
Sure. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. My name is Don Arceta, and I am a environment artist at heart, and my origins spawned from being a texture artist in the game industry. And for this collection, I was really looking for something that could encapsulate all a good variety and good kind of I don't want to say vertical slice, but just a good variety of different types of things that that I could create. So organic things, mechanical things, hard surface, and underwater, kind of the oceanic exploration. I felt like it was there was a lot of opportunity and potential there to be explored. So that's kind of what kind of led me into that subject.
All right, that's
Yeah.
awesome, Don. Thanks very much, man. So, what we're going to do here, like we said, is we are going to run through one of your materials. So, the material that you're going to share with us today, can you start to tell us a little bit? Well, actually, here, let's just dive into it. Why don't you just jump right into your screen share and then just kind of talk to us a bit about this material and why you chose this one?
Sure. So the this material is the fish bait ball, and it was one of the materials when I was starting this collection. One of the main things about this the way I chose my materials was something that I could map onto simple meshes and create a scene. And it basically would tell a story. So for this, it was a fish bait ball. The fish bait ball is a very, let me just bring up the reference here.
Hey Don, up in the top corner you can see the Skype window piece. Could you move that? Oh, thanks, man. Perfect. Yeah.
No worries. Um, let me just hide this. So you can see the fish bait ball. It is basically a defensive maneuver by fish whenever they get attacked by predators. And I thought that was a very cool, it was a kind of a cool visual, and I could see this kind of being put onto a material ball. So that was the general inspiration for this material. This is the material we'll be going through. And I thought that with that as the inspiration, what types of things can we create from this kind of general idea of fish mapped onto a ball? So yeah, this is the material we'll be going over.
Yeah, that's awesome, Don. And again, it's awesome how you kind of made that. You have your own reference or artboard. Just one of the things. Can you talk just a little bit about your mindset in terms of collecting reference? I mean, how important is that to you?
It is very important. So I guess it depends on the subject matter. There's a lot of things where some reference I use as inspiration, and there's reference also that I use um, as direct comparison against my work. But it is very important because it kind of keeps me grounded. It it gives me a goal to work towards, and in general, it just kind of keeps me inspired and keeps me focused on what I should be focusing on. So when I was gathering reference for this material specifically, there was two kind of sec kind of things I wanted to look at. So it was basically what it looked like on a macro view. Basically, what did it look like as a ball? What do the fish do? How do they interact with each other? And the second part of the reference was basically what does each individual fish look like? And this is reference is great because it answers so many questions for you, and it's so important because you're not making too much stuff on the fly. And the more things that you don't have to answer yourself, that a photo and good reference can do, the better off your material will be. So it's super important to gather good reference that's meaningful to you, and use that to create your materials. Yeah. So should I just dive in?
Yeah, take it away, man. Just dive on in and let's see how you created this, man. It looks incredible already. Like I can't believe how much detail you've put into this, and it's all just textures.
Yeah, thanks. So basically, for the fish bait ball, there's two things that were important about this material. As I mentioned, what it looked like from afar, how the fish are kind of layered against each other, but also all the details that the fish is made up of. Um, and like any material, I know a lot of good artists, whether it's materials or if you're sculpting characters, it's all about primary, secondary, and tertiary shapes. So that's kind of how I broke down this material. So I guess jumping right into the material, I would like to let's start with the body. Let's see here. So the body basically started with a very basic shape, which is basically a sphere or a circle. Squashed that circle, took another circle, squashed it, blended the two, and kind of got this very very kind of asymmetrical shape vertically. Let's see. Over here, took that shape, turn it 90 degrees, and use the trapezoid node to kind of pinch the bottom here. You kind of see where I'm going with this shape here. Transform that again, rotated it, kind of pushed it over to the side to make the best use of the real estate. Push it again to kind of get a bit more shape. Here, I'm starting to add just a little bit of the inklings of the tail, something for me to connect to. And then over here, I start a bevel. So this bevel, so once I have my shape, which is basically this, I add a bevel this is just for the height to kind of give it some curvature. And I run a levels to kind of ease the roundness. So that is the, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Don. So here you're using the bevel, I guess, and the levels to kind of help control like your shape and form. So here's where you're kind of, I guess, if we could say, like sculpting or modeling up the form.
Definitely. And that is, the body is like the main part of the fish, obviously. And yeah, it is basically just like modeling. And the levels is just kind of basically the intensity of that body, and it's really important because it'll drive every other detail that kind of lies on top of it. So from there, I'll move on to, let's go here. Quickly, the scales. So the scales I overlay on top of the body. So this, I guess I would consider more of a tertiary detail. So body was definitely primary. The scales is tertiary. So for the scales, start with a simple paraboloid shape. I run a levels on this, and this levels basically changes the silhouette of that model if I were modeling. And right now I run a gradient linear, multiply that against that that gradient paraboloid, and this gives me kind of like a shingle, kind of raised side. And then I run that through a tile generator. A lot of times offset it, and this basically gives me this kind of scale features that I'm looking for.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it works really well. It's very simple, but it works really well, and it was a yeah. So once I got that done, I work on some secondary features. So for the gills, which is right here, I got the initial shape, and I usually love to work with paraboloid shapes because they're quite uniform, and they give a nice round height. And I run it through levels to kind of make it a bit more shallow. Then I run it through a transform. So basically running this transform, rotating it, and placing it spatially to where the body is. So let me just run over here. What am I doing?
Hey, Don, we had one question come into the chat
Sure.
that I think is pretty good. So the question is, what's the reason behind putting nodes in different resolutions? Like, for example, they said 256 by 32. Is that a performance thing you're doing? Like, I guess if we take a look at that gradient linear one you have there.
Definitely. So it is definitely for performance, and these are things that you want to do throughout your substance so you just get faster feedback whenever you make a change. So for this instance, this gradient linear, a lot of the information that you need is just the horizontal information, and if you don't need the full resolution vertically. So therefore, you could have the 32 kind of pixel count, but the only thing you need is 256 pixels across to get that gradient information. So it is definitely for a performance of the material, and it's an easy way to kind of improve and make your materials a lot more usable. So yeah, it's definitely for performance.
Cool. Thanks, Don.
No worries. So going for the back to the eye, do a quick slope blur, and this is kind of directional, so you kind of see. I'm just augmenting it a little bit there. Some of these nodes, it's a little bit playful. I'm kind of doing just a little bit to get a little bit of organicness. So here, what I'm trying to do is isolate this kind of band around here. So to do that, I have the shape, transform that, do a linear dodge. and you can see the gill just kind of there. It's one of those things that's very subtle. So obviously when we're dealing with fish, it's not the actual degrees of change in height between the different elements isn't super strong, so it kind of comes in very subtly. So the next thing is the mouth. So here, start with a really small gradient, which I transform, rotate, and kind of push to the left side, which is where our mouth will be in comparison to the body. I use that same gradient. Blur it. This one is as well. I kind of blur it. And with those two blurred elements, I add them to kind of just give them a little bit of a bump. It's right there. At this point, I take this shape to adjust the silhouette of the overall body. Just enough to give the lip a little bit of more form. And again, take a simple shape, bevel it just to get the gradient, move it to where I want, and then use that to just really subtly add an indent into the fish. It's one of those really subtle things, but it really helps kind of give a bit more form to the actual feature. So that's the mouth. The next part is the tail fin. So here I actually just start with a shape. Here I use a square, but this could be a uniform color. Here I use the trapezoid transform. Invert that. So I got this nice black triangle here. And then I do another process which is very similar. So I make a shape, adjust the size, so I get kind of this scale. And here, like, it's very similar to this. And basically, I'm just creating these shapes to make cutouts for this.
So yeah, Don, if someone's watching, they're thinking modeling concepts. That's really kind of what you're doing here. You're creating like shapes, then you're just doing like almost like a Boolean subtraction or something, right? You're making cutters and then cutting shapes out.
Totally. Yeah. So it is basically just creating Booleans. You know, what is the big shape? So for here, it's creating the main shape, and then here it's creating the top shape.
Yeah.
And yeah, totally. It's just a Boolean. So here I invert it, rotate it, and then to add this kind of just break up, which you kind of see on the tail fins of the fish. I took a square pattern, ran it through the splatter node. So you just kind of get this radial kind of explosion look. And then I skew that towards the left. This gives me kind of like the breakup I'm looking for. I mirror this guy, stretch him out, blur him a little just to let him interact a bit more. Invert that, and then here I'm actually using it as a warp, and then here I'm using it as a multiply. So the warp gives me the silhouette, and the multiply gives me the inner details, which will give a little bit, yeah, a little bit more fidelity to the fin. So here is that directional warp blend into the main shape that you can see here. And then we blend the both together. So once I'm happy with the spin, I take this guy and push him over to where it sits with the rest of the body.
Okay, Don, this is really good, man. This looks awesome, and it brings me to a really big question I think a lot of new users ask. First off, this is awesome technique you have. So the question is, how did you know how to do that? Like, I mean, I think that's a lot of things people ask. Even I ask this myself all the time of a lot of the substance guys that I get to work with. I ask them, like, well, how did you know how to do that, you know? So could you talk just a little bit about how you came up with the idea of that? Is it trial and error? Is it just having some ideas and trying stuff? Because obviously there's no book or there's no one who says, here's how to do this in Substance. So you came up with this yourself. How did you do that?
No, totally. So yeah, the thing is, like with Substance, is the beauty of it is there's 1,000 ways to do one thing. And like you mentioned, Wes, like it is basically trial and error. It's kind of, hey, I kind of wanted to do this thing. Let's try this node. Let's yeah, let's try this node. I don't know what it does. Let's use it. I don't even know what it's supposed to be used for. And I think that's the beauty of Substance, is that you explore what these functions do, what these nodes do. So it is a lot of exploration, and I think that's the fun part of it. There's a lot of tried and true things that I do default to, that I guess just come with experience of making things. So, basically adding, subtracting things, ways to combine things. But there's always kind of new ways to use things. For this instance, one of the things I used more of was this kind of trapezoid transform, which I don't typically use, but it was one of those things where I'm just running through the nodes and saying, you know what, I really want to do this one specific thing, and you just kind of run through the different nodes and try it, and then you find it works, and that's great. But yeah, it is a lot of exploration. I could probably tell you that there's during the creation of this Substance, that there was another way that I created maybe this selection of nodes. But then because I did it a different way later down the material, I said, hey, I should go back to that part of the material where I tried to solve a similar problem, and I should just do it this way because it's a lot simpler, it's a lot more efficient, and it produces the same visual that I'm expecting. So it is a lot of trial and error, definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, yeah, it's the reason I think Substance Designer is so great, is this, it's so deep, and there's like you said, millions of ways to do one thing. So just real quick, I don't want to take you too off balance here, but just a follow-up question that was users asking, like, would you sometimes just open up a blank scene and just mess around with random nodes just to kind of build up some experience, like, like just kind of get to know what's there? Do you ever do that?
Or, yeah, definitely. So obviously, when a new drop of Substance comes out, the big thing is like, hey, what nodes are new? what improvements are there, and yeah, it's playing with those new nodes, um, and it's also things that I see that I just notice at work, not at work, sorry, on the way to work. So I might see some surfaces or textures, and it's always like, how can I create that thing? And usually, what I'll focus on is a specific aspect. So how can I create this specific shape? How can I create a specific pattern? And I'll focus on those things, and I might open up a blank scene and just try to recreate that one idea. Not necessarily the whole surface per se, but it's it's like, how can I create that pattern? And I think most substance users kind of have that practice kind of in their blood, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like I guess trying to solve a simple math equation, I guess. And but yeah, definitely it is something I love to do. I'll come home sometimes and open up a blank scene, not necessarily want to make a full-on material, but just try to play with patterns and outputs of what a node can give me, if that makes
Oh
sense.
yeah, yeah. That's perfect sense.
Yeah. Um, so so yeah, going back to the fin, so a bit more transformation here, adjusting. So this is for the mask. These histogram ranges, let me just sorry, I'm kind of jumping around here. So going to this kind of has all so what we just went over was basically we went over the mouth, and over obviously the whole body, we went over the fin, and the gills, and this is where we're at right now. So this is all the elements that we've gathered, that we put together. Um, Here I start to slot in just a bit of detail, kind of going down the fish. It's like this indent. It's kind of, there's like a muscle down here and a muscle up here. And let me go down to the fins because I'm starting to add the fins here. So this is kind of like the fun part of Substance, is kind of reusing. So here, recreate, kind of create this shape based off of our body that we made. So we're reusing shapes that we made, which is the body, for a fin. And we're just flipping it around to what we need. We're even reusing that starburst texture that we had earlier down over here. And it's great that you can use things that you're already processing to create other parts of your material. So with this is the shape that I use for multiple fins. So this is our fin shape. And these transformation 2Ds are basically placing that fin over multiple parts of the body. Excuse me. So you can see it right here. I'm adding these parts of the body all together. And so add the first part here. And then we add 1, 2, 3, 4 more fins there. And they're all the exact same element. They're just rotated and transformed in different ways. But they all kind of like look like they're unique to the fish. So once I have that, I run it through a histogram range. And that is when I start to introduce the eye. Oh, and kind of going back to performance, one great performance savings is purlin noises, which I love to use. So purlin noises are versatile in just kind of breaking up things and adding kind of variation. But the best thing about purlin noise is you don't have to have a super high resolution. They can be low resolution and still be effective. So throughout the graph, as you kind of look through all the purlin noises, they are quite low resolution. So let me just go through the eye. Here's the shape. I warp it a little bit with the purlin noise. Run it through the levels just to kind of bring them out a bit more. Transform to move it over. Another level, so that is specifically for the mask of the eye. And then here you can see the eye just coming in a little bit. The one thing too for this is I want to isolate kind of the socket for the eye. And here you can see the socket, and there's a slight kind of shape right there for the eye. Levels on it. And that is basically the final height for the fish.
That's incredible, man.
And as most substance artists do, like, you know, you start with the height. I'll always start with the height, and then after that, I'll move on to the base color, and then finally the roughness. I guess it depends on the mood if I want to do roughness first or the base color, but it's always height first. I feel like that's the thing with most substance artists.
Yeah, it definitely is a great way to work.
Yeah. So yeah, we have the final fish form. You know, we have the fins, we have the scales, we have the eye, the mouth. So the next part is I'll jump to the base color, I guess. Let's go over here. So I take that height information and I run it through a histogram select. And the histogram select is great because it basically lets me isolate areas I want to color. And let me just see here. So there's two things I'm isolating here. So there's the fins and the body. And let me start with, let's see here. So this is where I ended up with kind of the base color of the fish. And I'll kind of work backwards on how I got there. All right. So one of the main things of this material is that the fish color is very customizable. So the initial color for this was quite gray. And let's see here. I blend this color with itself to kind of create this variation. So it's something that I like to do specifically for this material. So the fish color isn't just one uniform color like for gray. That there is kind of this very subtle, nuanced shift in brightness. So I usually do just an HSL node, and in this instance I'll drop the lightness, but sometimes I might just increase the saturation a little bit just to add a little bit of variation. So the main thing for this fish is that the main body is gray, or let's call it, color A, and the other part of the color is color B, which is this top part. So I use a cheap gradient for this. So I got the nice top color here, the bottom color here. I'll introduce another tertiary color just on the top. So you get kind of three kind of variations of color. And then I finally blend that against our actual shape of the fish. And this is what you get for the body. So you can kind of get one color here, another color, and then another gray color here. As you can see, here's the color kind of set up for the fin. So as I mentioned before, I like to do, the user will kind of determine what this initial color is, but I like to do an HSL to kind of take that color and help introduce a little bit of variation. Just right here. So you can see how that works right there.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the subtle details that I've seen you talk about throughout the stream. It's like those are what really make the difference.
Yeah, no, totally. And it is very subtle. It's not as in your face, but it definitely does make a difference. And a lot of these details are just based off of, so for this instance, is just based off of, blurring the elements that exist in there and then blending them back in. And it's it's a nice way to add variation, definitely. So here I'm gonna start adding in the fins. The eye. Which again you can select. So the eye was an interesting one, because you don't want to just put like, a white eyeball and a black, pupil. It's there's kind of this discoloration that happens around the fish's eye, and that was interesting to catch. So let me just go back over here. So going back to our eye shape, sorry. Use that shape. And this is that same shape, scaled down. Blur. once I blur that, do levels, which kind of gives me this kind of interesting organic shape. Apply the color. And this kind of gives me that. It's a very kind of jelly kind of looking a fish eye kind of visual.
Yeah, I mean, it comes across like super well too. Like when I was looking at the 3D view, I was thinking, man, how did he do the eye? That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's one of those subtle things. It's kind of weird as well, but yeah, it works.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So here I am blending. This is back for the mouth. So here I'm just adding the subtlest degree of color, kind of color alteration for the mouth. It's very subtle. Here I mask out the fish. So that covers the color. I will probably, the last thing before I move on to the tile generators is the roughness. And for me, roughness is usually the last thing I usually work on. It's usually height, then going to the base color, and then roughness last. So yeah, the last stop is roughness, which is usually, depending on the material you're doing, is could be the easiest thing to do, or it could be the most difficult thing to do. But usually the type of materials I like to create, it's usually kind of last on my list. Um, so to start the roughness, I start with the height map. I create for the body, sans fins, and I use that normal map to create a curvature. And this curvature gives me a lot of information, and a lot of this information I can use to help augment my roughness. So here, I take that curvature and I basically push everything gray to black and everything white, leave it at white, and this gives me a mask. And with that mask, I can dictate the different roughness I want. So here, basically, I'm getting a nice gradient of roughness from the end of the scale to the kind of more the broader part of the scale, where I get a bit more smooth. And this just gives me a lot more surface interest for the fish overall. Let's see here. Here I mask out the one fin of the fish, and the thing to note here is that everything outside of this is, so you got the fin here, you got other fins here, you got this fin, and what I wanted to do with this is that all these fins were of the same value in terms of roughness. So here I'm starting to isolate some roughness values just for the tail fin. So this is just to give me a bit more variation. Variation on on the tail fin, just so it doesn't seem so flat.
Yeah, so just breaking up, I guess, the roughness like that, how it affects the overall kind of gloss or reflection.
Definitely, yeah. And it just adds more depth and believability to the material. Here I isolate the eye. It's kind of this dot here. For me, I wanted to really give the eye, um, a lot more glossiness, give it that jelly type look. So it is quite low on the roughness scale. And here is the final alpha of the roughness of the fish. So you can see, um, you know, very glossy on the eye, quite rough on the fins, fading off to not as to a bit more smooth, and a lot of smooth kind of fins over here, and the tail fin getting some nice contrast and roughness definition there. So that is basically the roughness. Um, the fun part is moving on to the tile generator. So that was basically all the kind of macro and micro scale stuff just on the basis of the fish. So now we're kind of moving to what does the fish bait ball look like, and how do these fish kind of interact with each other, which is the next step. So for that, going back to the height, I used a basic tile generator. You can see each individual fish here. And for this, things I like to expose was scale, having randomization in the scale, the offset of the fish, and the offset randomization to kind of give it a bit more organicness. So this was, and I ran that through each individual kind of aspect of the fish. So for the roughness and for the base color as well. Once I was happy with the amount of fish that was on there, I ran it through the levels, just to kind of, I'll kind of get back to that later, why I ran it through levels. After that, run it through a blur. And the reason for that is because I combine the fish against themselves to get a look where they're overlapping each other. So I always feel like one of the trickiest things in Substance Designer is to make things look like they're kind of on top of each other. So you can see right here, this fish looks like it's kind of resting on top of this guy right here. A lot of the times, so the reason I didn't just run the tile generator and just cranked up the numbers so they overlap is because a lot of the time when you do that is you start clipping the models, I guess. Like if we're treating each fish as a model, you start clipping them and they start booleaning each other, I guess.
Yeah.
And they never kind of stack on top of each other. So the way around that was to kind of manually add them to each other. And for this instance, it works. Sometimes it might not work as well, but this was the method I found that worked the best when dealing with overlapping fish.
That's really awesome, Don. So yeah, this is something people have brought up before, and I've kind of seen this technique, but I've never really like seen it up close like this. So yeah, I'm super interested in why you're doing this. Could you explain just a little bit more on like so you're using the blur to adjust the height depth, I guess, is that right?
Yes. So, well, basically, I'm introducing the blur to augment one layer of the fish.
Okay.
So there is, um, so let's see, the initial layer of the fish, which came from my tile generator, is this guy. So basically, I do a transformation to the just kind of just offset the fish. So that is just positional.
Okay.
But if they're the same fish. So once I take those guys, I need to, um, I basically need to offset them and add height to them to to make it look like something is interacting with them. So I take this kind of blurred approach where I take the original tile. So I take this guy, I get the levels I like, blur it, and this blur is yeah, like I said, this blur is basically just an offset uh, to say, hey, push this up. So
Yeah.
you can
Okay.
start pushing these guys up.
Yeah.
Uh, I never push anything down, but I'm always pushing things up. Um, and let's see here. Yeah, it is an interesting, I guess, interesting way to do it. Let me just see here. Sorry.
No, it's really good. I mean, I've seen instances like where that's useful. Like I know that the team built the shape splatter node. I may be getting the name wrong, but shape splatter where they built into the height where you can mix and do more overlaps better, like using conform to background and things. But this type of technique too, I think, is super useful in other various situations. So it's awesome you showed this. I myself have been really curious about seeing how this works. So I'm so glad that you
Yeah,
showed it. Thanks, man. This is really cool.
yeah, no worries. The thing I found with this the shape splatter, it's great. I just thought there was just a bit more. Um, it was a bit more cleaner doing it this way, and it was a bit more. I guess I had more control over the what I expected it for it to do.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not saying the shape splatter isn't great, but I found this way for this specific material to work out even better.
No, this is
So you
this
could,
is a great example, man. Yeah, so good showing different ways to do things. Like you said earlier, there's always more than one way. Man, thanks for showing. This is so cool.
all right. So you can see that I basically, excuse me. So you can see here. Let me just find a good example. So this was the initial tile generator I did of this fish, which I blurred, and you could see that for this layer, this is an offset version of this guy, but then I added the blurred version of this, and allows that just kind of pushes it over and allows me to get this sort of result where it looks like it's resting on the other fish and it's not clipping through or um, which is a common visual you get with like what is it, max blends, and that just gives a lot more realistic um, kind of shape.
Yeah, and I guess yeah, you can also use this with other things, like if you're doing stones or sticks or anything like that, kind of blending over top of each other.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And um, the thing I love to do as well, which we kind of touched upon, was so I tile generated this batch of fish, but I'm just kind of offsetting it. You can see now I offset it off here just to kind of increase the density. So I'm not necessarily cranking up the density in the tile generator. I am just adding it back in. Oh, yeah, I'm just adding it back in using that method I just did.
Yeah.
And the important thing, I guess, going back to the tile generator, to do it this method is you want to create the tile generator, but make sure that none of the fish overlap. So you can see here, you know, maybe aside from this fin, maybe clipping into this fish, that none of the fish clip into each other. So that was it's very important that if you wanted to do it this method, that you make sure that each fish is separated and is not overlapping with a neighboring fish. And I think that's the the best way to do it this method. So you can do these overlaps. The overlaps come in the next phase. So yeah, so once we have that overlap, I do a little bit of a histogram range. So because the next a lot of times I do histogram ranges because I am going to add another level of detail or another level of height to it. So here, what I'm doing is another Perlin noise, and I'm using a vector morph to just add some variation to all the fish. So you can see once I add this guy, the vector morph, that all the fish kind of have a different movement and a different kind of body formation, different stance. And then from that, I create the normal for the fish. So the last thing for the fish, like I said about this histogram range, where I'm kind of clamping it between a certain range. And when I said that I want to add another layer of depth to it, I will add a what I usually like to do is add a very macro scale kind of formation. In this case, it's another Perlin noise, very low res. And this is just to add a very broad kind of shape change to the overall material, which you can see here. You can see that there is a bit of a waviness to the fish. And I like, no matter what material I do, whether it's kind of repetitive like this fish, or if it's a ground material or concrete, there's always something that I love. I always love doing a macro scale distortion just to kind of throw it off a bit and it's not perfectly straight. And I feel like it just helps the overall surface. Going to the color. So this is the color we have, and I run it through the exact same tile generator properties that I have, and all of these are basically linked up with the properties of the height. So they're all kind of handcuffed together, and I run the exact same process here where I take the tile, I offset it, and then I blend the two back together to kind of get them overlapping. You can see here. run it through the exact same vector morph. So I'm kind of duplicating processes here from the height field. And here, the curvature. So a lot of the times I like to run my height field into a normal map, and then to produce a curvature, and then use that gradient map produced from that curvature just to add a little bit more detail in the fish, to kind of insinuate lighting information that I wouldn't get from the render. So you can see this is it without the curvature, and here it is with the curvature. It's very subtle, but it really helps make the surfaces pop. And that is basically run into the finished albedo. So the last thing is the roughness. So let me just run to the tile sampler of the roughness here. So the roughness again, run it through the tile sampler, offset it, blend it back to itself. You get everything overlapping where it should be overlapping. Convert this to grayscale, morph it to get that organic shape, and that becomes my roughness right there. So yeah, that's basically the material.
That's incredible
Yeah.
work, man. Thank you so much, Don, for sharing this with us. I mean, that's really good. Yeah, we're actually just a little bit over an hour, so we can start to kind of close out the stream. If there's anything that you'd like to kind of share with anybody from the channel, I'm also kind of looking to see if there was any other kind of questions I can address. One question that I did miss coming from Vincent, who's monitoring our chat, was how do you find balancing point in having more fish in the tile and not losing detail in the fish themselves?
Right. So, I mean, that's a great question. So obviously the substance source materials are there is a certain spec that we make the substance source materials for, and that is, I think, the typical resolution is 2K materials. So that is kind of the determining point of how much detail to put into the fish. For me, the fish was all about how it looked like as a ball. So hence the name why it was called fish bait ball. And it wasn't called out as being just a fish. So for me, I determined the amount of detail I wanted to put in the fish from the sense of how I intended it to be seen, which was as a ball rather than an individual fish. So definitely not up close, but from afar, if that answers the question.
Good, thanks, Don. And one more thing, do you happen to have like a finished render here of the scene?
Yeah.
I can grab it if you don't have one. I can just jump over to the source
Yeah,
page.
yeah. If you have it ready, I also have some on ArtStation.
Yeah, why don't you
Um,
do that? Why don't you
yeah.
pull up your ArtStation as well, real quick?
Let me see here. Oh, all right. I have to sign in, but I will find myself. Let's see here. So here it comes. Can you see the fish?
Oh yeah. It looks awesome, man.
Yeah.
What'd you
So
do?
here,
What'd you use to render? What's the rendering software?
right. So I use Marmoset for this, and for all my renders, I kind of established a unified lighting scenario, which I use for all the substances for the signature selection. And yeah, so here's the fish as the bait ball. You can see the glossiness in the eyes and all kind of the details in the scales. And this was kind of the intended view that you would see this material from. As I go down here, you can see that there's kind of the variation you can get from the colors, um, and yeah, marmoset. Yeah, most of all the renders are from marmoset. And finally, here's just a render of it in kind of context. It inside kind of this fishing, I guess, aquapod, as they call it, where they farm fish. And I thought it was a cool visual of having the bait ball inside of this farming cage. So yeah, here's the final render.
That's incredible, man. I mean, really super well done.
Oh, thanks.
All right, Don. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll close this out. So again, Don, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and taking time to walk through this material. We had a lot of people asking questions in the chat. Very well done, man. And just so with for anyone listening, this is actually saved. So if you want to go back and rewatch this again, you can. Also, there is a link in the description of the YouTube channel that has a link to where you can download this exact material. So you go back, look at it through Substance Designer, check out everything that Don did in the actual setup. So again, Don, thanks very much. Thanks for providing this substance to the community. Your work is absolutely amazing, and we're honored to be able to host you. So thank you very much, Don.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks.
All right, we'll sign off, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.